The sleek black Bentley pulled up to Rosewood Bistro with the kind of quiet power that made people turn their heads. The driver stepped out first, adjusting his cap before walking around to open the passenger door. Out stepped Victoria Ashworth, 23 years old and worth more money than most people could count in a lifetime. She didn't thank the driver. She never did. To Victoria, people like him were just part of the background, like furniture or decorations. She smoothed down her designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent and checked her reflection in the car's tinted window. Perfect, as always. Victoria's heels clicked against the pavement as she walked toward the restaurant entrance. The sound was sharp and demanding, just like everything else about her. She wore diamonds that caught the afternoon sunlight and threw tiny rainbows across the sidewalk. Her handbag was custom-made, her shoes were one of a kind, and her attitude was as expensive as everything else she owned. The restaurant staff saw her coming through the glass doors and immediately straightened up. They knew who she was. Everyone in this part of town knew the Ashworth name. Her father, Richard Ashworth, had built a technology empire that touched almost every part of modern life. Victoria had grown up in mansions, traveled in private jets, and never once worried about money. She walked through the restaurant like she owned it, which, knowing her family's wealth, she probably could if she wanted to. Other diners glanced up from their meals, some recognizing her from society pages and gossip websites. Victoria loved the attention. She fed on it like plants feed on sunlight. Her usual table was already prepared in the best spot in the restaurant, near the large windows that offered a perfect view of the city's most expensive shopping district. The table was set with the finest china and crystal glasses that sparkled under the chandelier. Victoria slid into her seat without acknowledging the host who had guided her there. Within minutes, her friends began arriving. Each one was cut from the same expensive cloth as Victoria. They wore clothes that could feed families for months and talked about problems that weren't really problems at all. Their biggest worry was whether to vacation in Paris or Milan next month, or which charity gala would have the best photographers. The conversation flowed like champagne, bubbly and intoxicating but ultimately empty. They gossiped about celebrities they'd never met, criticized people they barely knew, and planned shopping trips that would cost more than most people's cars. Victoria was the queen of this little group, and she loved every minute of it. When the waiter approached to take their drink orders, Victoria barely looked up from her conversation. She rattled off her usual complicated order with extra demands and special requests, speaking to the young man like he was a machine instead of a person. Her friends followed suit, each trying to outdo the others with increasingly difficult requests. The restaurant buzzed with quiet energy around them. Business people discussed deals over lunch, couples shared intimate conversations, and families celebrated special occasions. But Victoria's table existed in its own bubble of privilege and entitlement. They were the center of their own universe, and everyone else was just background noise. Victoria had never worked a day in her life. She'd never worried about paying bills, never stressed about money, never felt the weight of real responsibility. College had been a social experience rather than an educational one. Her degree hung on her apartment wall like an expensive piece of art, pretty to look at but serving no real purpose. She lived in a penthouse apartment that her father had bought her for her 21st birthday. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a private elevator, and a view that real estate agents called priceless. But Victoria rarely looked at the view anymore. Beautiful things lost their magic when you had too many of them. Her days were filled with spa appointments, personal shopping sessions, and lunch dates like this one. She attended charity events not because she cared about the causes, but because they were the right places to be seen. She donated money the way other people bought coffee, without thinking about it or feeling the impact. The staff at Rosewood Bistro moved around their table with practiced efficiency, refilling water glasses and ensuring everything was perfect. They knew that keeping Victoria happy meant good tips and no complaints to management. But they also knew that one small mistake could turn her into a storm that would ruin everyone's day. Victoria snapped her fingers when she wanted something, a habit that made the servers' teeth clench with frustration. She spoke about them as if they couldn't hear her, commenting on their appearance or speed of service to her friends like they were reviewing a show instead of interacting with human beings. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over their table. Victoria's jewelry caught the light and sent sparkles dancing across the white tablecloth. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, beautiful and untouchable, but there was something cold in her eyes, something that all the money in the world couldn't warm. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications from social media, text messages from other wealthy friends, and updates from personal assistants who managed every detail of her life. She barely looked up from the screen, more interested in the digital world than the real people around her. Victoria had everything money could buy, but she had never learned the value of anything. She lived in a golden cage of privilege that protected her from the real world, but also isolated her from genuine human connection. She was surrounded by people but truly alone, wealthy beyond measure but spiritually poor. As the lunch continued, the stage was being set for a collision that would shake Victoria's perfectly ordered world. She had no idea that in just a few minutes her carefully constructed bubble of entitlement was about to burst in the most unexpected way possible. The universe was preparing to teach her a lesson that no amount of money could buy, and it would come from the most unlikely teacher of all. The young waitress approached Victoria's table with careful steps, balancing a crystal pitcher of ice water in her hands. Her name was Isabella, though Victoria had never bothered to learn it despite eating at this restaurant every week for months. To Victoria, she was just another face in the endless parade of service workers who existed to make her life easier. Isabella had been working at Rosewood Bistro for 8 months now. She was 19 years old, with gentle brown eyes and a smile that could light up a room when she wasn't feeling nervous. Today she felt nervous. Victoria's table always made her nervous. The way Victoria looked at her, like she was something unpleasant that needed to be tolerated, made Isabella's hands shake slightly. The lunch rush was in full swing, and Isabella had been running between tables for hours. Her feet ached in her practical black shoes, and a thin layer of sweat had formed on her forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. She had served hundreds of customers in her time here, but none affected her confidence like Victoria and her friends. As Isabella reached for Victoria's glass to refill it, disaster struck in slow motion. Her tired hand trembled just slightly, and a few drops of cold water splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth near Victoria's plate. It was barely noticeable, just 3 or 4 tiny drops that would dry in minutes. But to Victoria, it might as well have been a flood. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Victoria's head snapped up from her phone, her perfectly styled blonde hair whipping around her shoulders. Her blue eyes, which had been sparkling with laughter just moments before, turned ice cold. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Are you kidding me right now?" Victoria's voice cut through the restaurant's gentle buzz like a knife through silk. Her tone was sharp enough to slice glass, loud enough to make other diners turn their heads. "Do you see what you just did?" Isabella's heart sank to her stomach. She quickly grabbed a napkin and began dabbing at the tiny water spots. "I'm so sorry, Miss Ashworth. Let me clean this up right away. It's just a little water and I can—" "Just a little water?" Victoria stood up so quickly that her chair scraped against the floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? Do you have any clue what kind of damage water can do to silk?" The entire restaurant was watching now. Conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Forks hung suspended halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen staff had peeked out through the service window to see what was causing the commotion. Isabella felt dozens of pairs of eyes on her, and her cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I understand you're upset," Isabella said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the water didn't touch your dress. It just hit the tablecloth and I can clean it up completely. There's no damage to anything." Victoria's friends sat frozen in their seats, some looking uncomfortable, but none brave enough to tell their wealthy friend to calm down. They had seen Victoria's temper before, but never directed at someone who couldn't fight back. It was like watching a lion attack a lamb. "Don't tell me what happened." Victoria's voice rose even higher. "I know what happened. You came over here with your clumsy hands and your careless attitude, and you ruined our lunch. Do you think this is some cheap diner where you can splash water around like it doesn't matter?" Isabella's eyes began to fill with tears, but she blinked them back. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but nothing like this. Victoria's anger seemed way out of proportion to what had actually happened. It was like she had been waiting for an excuse to explode, and Isabella had just given her one. "Maybe you should think about finding a different job," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "Something that doesn't require coordination or basic competence. Maybe something where you can't destroy other people's property with your incompetence." The words hit Isabella like physical blows. She had been working since she was 16 to help support her family. This job wasn't just a paycheck for her. It was a lifeline. She worked hard, showed up on time, and treated every customer with respect. She didn't deserve this kind of humiliation over a few drops of water. "I want to speak to your manager," Victoria demanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Isabella's face. "I want you fired today, right now. People like you shouldn't be working in a place like this. You're bringing down the whole establishment." Isabella nodded silently and turned to find her manager, but Victoria wasn't finished. "And another thing," she called after her. "Don't think you're getting a tip from this table. You're lucky if I don't sue this place for the damage you've caused." The manager, a kind middle-aged man named Robert, appeared within seconds. He had been watching the scene unfold from across the room, and his face was tight with concern. He knew Victoria's family was important, but he also knew Isabella was one of his best employees. "Miss Ashworth," he said calmly, "I understand there's been a small accident. Please let me take care of this for you. I can have the table completely reset in just a few minutes." "A small accident?" Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your employee just destroyed our lunch with her carelessness. I want her fired immediately, or my family will be reconsidering our relationship with this establishment." Isabella stood behind her manager, her whole body trembling. The threat was clear and terrifying. Victoria's family had enough money and influence to destroy the restaurant's reputation with a few phone calls. Isabella knew that her job, and possibly the jobs of everyone who worked here, hung in the balance. But then something unexpected happened. As Victoria continued her tirade, demanding action and threatening consequences, a soft sound began to fill the restaurant. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, but grew stronger with each passing moment. Someone was playing the piano. The old upright piano in the corner of the restaurant had been sitting silent all afternoon, as it usually did during lunch service. Most customers didn't even notice it was there. But now gentle notes began flowing from its keys, and the melody was so beautiful that it seemed to cast a spell over the entire room. Victoria's angry words began to fade as the music grew stronger. Even she couldn't help but turn toward the source of the sound. And when she did, her world changed forever. Sitting at the piano bench, her server's uniform still on and her hands moving across the keys like they were dancing, was Isabella. The same girl Victoria had just been screaming at, the same person she had called worthless and incompetent, was creating music so beautiful that it made the air itself seem to shimmer. Victoria's mouth fell open in shock. The angry words died on her lips. For the first time in her life, she was completely speechless. The transformation was like watching magic happen in real time. Isabella, who had been trembling with humiliation just moments before, now sat at the piano with a grace and confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. Her fingers moved across the black and white keys with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a poet. The piece she chose was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful and technically challenging pieces in classical piano repertoire. But Isabella didn't just play it. She breathed life into it. Every note seemed to tell a story. Every phrase painted a picture in the minds of everyone listening. Victoria stood frozen in place, her hand still raised from pointing accusingly at Isabella. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. She had been prepared to continue her attack, to demand justice for the terrible crime of a few water drops. Instead, she found herself witnessing something that challenged everything she thought she knew about the world. The restaurant had fallen completely silent except for the piano. Conversation stopped mid-word. Waiters paused with plates in their hands. The chef stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, drawn by the incredible sound. Even the businessmen who had been arguing loudly about their deals sat quietly, their phones forgotten on the table. Isabella's eyes were closed as she played, and tears streamed down her cheeks. But these weren't tears of embarrassment or anger. They were tears of pure emotion, of a soul finding its voice through music. Every frustration, every moment of exhaustion, every dream she carried was pouring out through her fingertips onto those keys. Victoria had heard professional musicians before. Her family's wealth had given her access to the finest concert halls and the most expensive private performances. She had attended the opera in Vienna, heard symphony orchestras in London, and been to exclusive recitals in New York. But she had never heard anything like this. This wasn't just technical skill, though Isabella's technique was flawless. This wasn't just musical knowledge, though her understanding of the piece was clearly deep and mature. This was something else entirely. This was a human being speaking directly from her heart to the hearts of everyone listening. The melody rose and fell like ocean waves, sometimes gentle and soothing, sometimes powerful and dramatic. Isabella's whole body moved with the music, swaying slightly as her hands danced across the keys. She looked like she belonged there, like the piano bench was her natural home in a way that a restaurant table had never been. Victoria's friends sat in stunned silence. They had come here expecting their usual lunch of gossip and complaints, maybe some shopping plans and social media updates. Instead, they were witnessing something that none of their money could buy: genuine talent, raw emotion, and true artistry. The other customers in the restaurant began to gather closer, drawn by the magnetic pull of the music. An elderly couple who had been celebrating their anniversary stood hand in hand, their eyes bright with unshed tears. A businessman who had been stressed about a presentation forgot all about his problems and just listened. A mother eating lunch with her teenage daughter smiled as she watched her child's face light up with wonder. Isabella played with her entire being. Her technique was perfect, but more than that, her interpretation was deeply personal. She took Chopin's composition and made it her own, adding subtle touches and emotional nuances that spoke of years of study and practice. This wasn't someone who had learned to play piano as a hobby or social skill. This was someone who lived and breathed music. Victoria began to notice details she had missed before. Isabella's hands, which she had criticized for being clumsy, moved with incredible precision and grace. Her posture at the piano was perfect, the result of years of proper training. Her timing, her dynamics, her phrasing. Everything showed the mark of serious musical education. As the piece continued, Victoria found herself remembering her own piano lessons as a child. Her parents had hired the best teachers money could buy, set up a beautiful music room in their mansion, and bought her a concert-quality piano. But Victoria had never had the patience for practice. She had quit after a few months, preferring to spend her time on easier pleasures. Isabella, meanwhile, had clearly dedicated years of her life to music. Every note she played spoke of countless hours of practice, of sacrifice and determination. Victoria began to realize that while she had been handed everything in life, Isabella had earned this talent through hard work and dedication. The emotional climax of the piece approached, and Isabella's playing became even more intense. Her fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and accuracy, creating cascading waterfalls of sound that seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant. The music was so beautiful that it hurt to listen to, so perfect that it seemed impossible that it was coming from the same person Victoria had been yelling at just minutes before. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest, like ice breaking in the spring. For the first time in her life, she was seeing past the surface of another person. She was seeing past Isabella's uniform, past her job title, past her social status. She was seeing her soul, and it was beautiful beyond anything Victoria had ever imagined. The piece began to wind down, the notes becoming softer and more gentle. Isabella's tears continued to fall, but her expression was peaceful now, almost serene. She had found her sanctuary in the music, a place where the cruelty of the outside world couldn't touch her. As the final notes faded into silence, the restaurant erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It was the kind of enthusiastic, heartfelt appreciation usually reserved for concert halls and opera houses. People stood up, some wiping tears from their eyes, others calling out words of praise and encouragement. Isabella opened her eyes and looked around the room, as if she was surprised to find herself there. The applause seemed to embarrass her, and she started to stand up from the piano bench. But before she could leave, Victoria stepped forward. For the first time in her life, Victoria Ashworth didn't know what to say. She stood there looking at this young woman who had just turned her world upside down, with nothing but music and truth. The angry words she had been shouting seemed to echo in her memory like bitter poison. Victoria realized that she had just witnessed something miraculous, and she had almost destroyed it with her cruelty and ignorance. The person she had called worthless had just proven herself to be worth more than Victoria could ever hope to be. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything that had just happened. Victoria knew that this moment would change her forever. though she didn't yet understand how. As the applause gradually died down, whispered conversations began to ripple through the restaurant like gentle waves. Victoria remained standing near the piano, still stunned by what she had just witnessed. Her legs felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath her had shifted without warning. An elderly woman at a nearby table leaned toward her companion, her voice soft but clear enough for Victoria to hear. "That's Isabella Martinez," she said with obvious admiration. "She's been working here for months, but I had no idea she could play like that. My granddaughter takes piano lessons, and her teacher charges $200 an hour for lessons that aren't half as good as what we just heard." Victoria's ears perked up despite herself. She found herself listening intently as more pieces of Isabella's story began to emerge from the conversations around her. It was like watching a puzzle come together, revealing a picture she had never bothered to look at before. Robert, the restaurant manager, approached Isabella with tears in his eyes. "Isabella, honey, why didn't you ever tell us you could play like that? That was absolutely incredible." His voice carried the warmth of someone who genuinely cared about his employees, something Victoria had never really noticed before. Isabella wiped her eyes with a napkin and managed a small smile. "I don't like to talk about it at work, Mr. Robert. People sometimes think I'm showing off or that I think I'm too good for this job. But music has always been my escape, you know? When things get really hard, I just find a piano somewhere and play." A regular customer, a woman Victoria recognized from other lunches, joined the conversation. "Isabella, dear, my husband is a music professor at the university. He's told me about students who've won international competitions, and honestly, you play better than most of them. Have you had professional training?" Isabella's smile became tinged with sadness. "I studied at the conservatory for 3 years," she said quietly. "I was accepted to Juilliard School of Music in New York on a full scholarship. It was my dream since I was little. I was supposed to start last year." Victoria felt her stomach drop. Juilliard was one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. Getting accepted there was like winning the lottery, especially with a full scholarship. Only the most talented musicians in the world even had a chance. "What happened?" Robert asked gently. "Why didn't you go?" Isabella's voice became even quieter, and Victoria had to strain to hear her. "My mom got sick. Really sick. The doctors found cancer, and the treatment she needed wasn't covered by our insurance. Someone had to work to pay for her medical bills, and my dad was already working 2 jobs. I couldn't leave her, not when she needed me most." The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that made Victoria feel sick to her stomach. While she had been complaining about which luxury car to buy, Isabella had been making a choice that most people could never imagine. She had given up her dreams to save her mother's life. "So you deferred your scholarship?" the music professor's wife asked, hope in her voice. Isabella shook her head. "Juilliard doesn't hold scholarships. If you don't take it that year, it's gone. They offered it to someone else. I understand why. There are so many talented musicians who want that chance. I just wish things had been different." Victoria felt like she was going to be sick. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Here was someone who had earned the opportunity of a lifetime through talent and hard work, and she had given it up for love. Meanwhile, Victoria had been handed everything and never appreciated any of it. An older gentleman at another table spoke up. "How is your mother doing now, dear?" "She's fighting," Isabella replied, her voice full of both hope and exhaustion. "The doctors say there's a new treatment that could help, but it's experimental. Insurance won't cover it because they say it's not proven enough yet. We're trying to save up for it, but it costs $50,000 and we're nowhere close to having that kind of money." $50,000. Victoria spent more than that on a single shopping trip. She had jewelry in her closet worth twice that amount. Her car cost 5 times more than Isabella's mother needed to live. "That's why I work here during the day, clean offices at night, and give piano lessons on weekends," Isabella continued. "Every dollar goes toward Mom's treatment fund. Some days I'm so tired I can barely stand, but then I remember why I'm doing it, and I find the strength to keep going." Victoria thought about her own schedule: spa appointments, shopping, lunch dates, and manicures. She had never worked a day in her life, never felt the weight of real responsibility, never had to choose between her dreams and someone else's life. Robert put a gentle hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Why didn't you ever tell me about your situation? We could have helped somehow, maybe adjusted your schedule or—" "You've been kind enough already, Mr. Robert. Isabella interrupted. You gave me a job when I had no experience, and you've been patient with me while I learned. I don't want anyone's pity. I just want to earn my way and take care of my family. Victoria remembered all the times she had snapped her fingers at Isabella, all the complicated orders she had made just to show off, all the times she had complained about service that was actually perfectly fine. She remembered the condescending way she had spoken to Isabella just minutes ago, calling her worthless and incompetent. The truth was devastating. Isabella was worth more than Victoria could ever hope to be. She had talent that Victoria could never buy, character that Victoria had never developed, and courage that Victoria had never needed to find. Isabella was fighting for something real, while Victoria had been playing games with a privileged life she had never earned. A young man who worked in the kitchen came out to speak with Isabella. My sister goes to the community college, he said. She told me they have a piano in the music building that students can use for practice. Maybe you could go there sometimes instead of trying to find time between your jobs. Isabella's eyes lit up with gratitude. That would be wonderful, Carlos. I miss playing so much. Sometimes I dream about music and I wake up with my fingers moving like I'm playing piano in my sleep. Victoria felt tears stinging her eyes. While she slept in silk sheets in her penthouse apartment, Isabella was dreaming about the music she no longer had time to play. While Victoria complained about being bored, Isabella was working 3 jobs and still finding ways to pursue her passion. The conversation continued around her, but Victoria felt like she was underwater, everything muffled and strange. People shared stories about Isabella's kindness, her work ethic, her positive attitude even on the hardest days. Customer after customer spoke about how she had brightened their day with her genuine smile and caring attention. Victoria realized that in all her lunches at this restaurant, she had never once seen Isabella as a real person. She had been just another piece of furniture, something to order around and ignore. But Isabella had been living a life of incredible depth and meaning right in front of her, and Victoria had been too self-absorbed to notice. The weight of her own emptiness crashed down on her like a wave. What did she have to show for her 23 years of life? What had she contributed to the world? What dreams had she pursued with the passion that Isabella showed for music? Victoria looked at Isabella, who was now chatting quietly with the other staff members who had gathered around her. Despite everything she had been through, despite the cruel treatment Victoria had just subjected her to, Isabella's face showed no bitterness or anger. She looked tired but peaceful, like someone who knew exactly who she was and what mattered to her. For the first time in her life, Victoria wished she could be someone else. Victoria stood frozen in place as Isabella's story sank into her consciousness like water soaking into dry earth. Every word she had just heard felt like a small explosion in her mind, shattering beliefs she had held her entire life. The restaurant continued to buzz with quiet conversations about Isabella's incredible performance, but Victoria felt like she was standing in a bubble of silence, completely alone with her thoughts. She looked down at her hands, these perfectly manicured hands that had never done a day of real work. Her nails were painted with polish that cost more than Isabella probably made in tips in a week. She thought about Isabella's hands, calloused from washing dishes and cleaning, yet capable of creating beauty that brought tears to people's eyes. The contrast was so stark it made Victoria dizzy. She had everything money could buy, yet she felt empty inside. Isabella had almost nothing in terms of material wealth, yet she radiated a richness of spirit that Victoria had never encountered before. Victoria's friends were still sitting at their table looking uncomfortable and confused. They kept glancing between Victoria and Isabella, unsure how to react to what had just happened. Their perfect little lunch had been disrupted by reality, and they didn't know how to process it. "Victoria, are you okay?" One of them called out softly. "Maybe we should just go. I mean, the music was nice and all, but this whole situation is getting a bit awkward." But Victoria couldn't move. She was experiencing something she had never felt before, genuine shame. Not embarrassment about social situations or worry about her appearance, but deep, soul-crushing shame about who she was as a person. She watched Isabella talking quietly with her coworkers, graciously accepting their praise and support. Even after the humiliation Victoria had put her through, Isabella showed no signs of anger or resentment. She seemed to have already forgiven Victoria's outburst, or perhaps she was just used to being treated poorly by customers. That thought made Victoria feel even worse. How many times had Isabella endured cruel treatment from entitled customers? How many times had she swallowed her pride and absorbed unfair criticism just to keep her job? Victoria realized she was probably just one in a long line of people who had made Isabella's life harder for no good reason. Victoria remembered her own piano lessons as a child. Her teacher, Mrs. Chen, had been patient and encouraging, but Victoria had quit after just 3 months. She claimed the lessons were boring, that the piano was too hard, that she had better things to do. In reality, she had quit because learning piano required effort and persistence, qualities that Victoria had never needed to develop. Now she watched Isabella, who had somehow found the time and determination to reach a level of skill that professional musicians would envy, all while working multiple jobs and caring for a sick mother. The dedication required was almost incomprehensible to Victoria. She thought about all the opportunities she had wasted, the expensive schools she had attended without caring about learning, the tutors her parents had hired who she had ignored, the chances to develop real skills or pursue meaningful goals that she had thrown away because everything came too easily. Victoria had never faced real adversity. When she wanted something, she bought it. When she had a problem, her father's money solved it. When she made mistakes, her family's influence made the consequences disappear. She had lived her entire life in a protective bubble that kept her safe but also kept her from growing into a real person. Isabella, on the other hand, had faced challenges that would have broken most people. Yet instead of becoming bitter or giving up, she had used those challenges to become stronger, more compassionate, more determined. She had found ways to pursue her passion despite overwhelming obstacles. The music Isabella had played still echoed in Victoria's mind. Every note had been infused with emotion that came from real experience, real struggle, real love. Victoria tried to remember the last time she had felt anything that deeply. The last time she had cared about something enough to fight for it, to sacrifice for it, to pour her whole heart into it. She couldn't remember a single instance. Victoria looked around the restaurant with new eyes. She saw the other servers, young people working hard to earn money for school or to support their families. She saw customers from all walks of life, each with their own stories and struggles. She saw a world full of real people living real lives, while she had been floating above it all in her bubble of privilege. The elderly woman at the nearby table was still talking about Isabella's performance. "You know," she said to her companion, "that young lady reminds me of my daughter when she was that age. So talented, so dedicated. The difference is my daughter had every advantage in life. She had the best teachers, the finest instruments, all the time in the world to practice. This girl has none of that, yet she plays with more soul than my daughter ever did." Victoria felt like she was seeing herself in a mirror for the first time, and the reflection was ugly. She was the daughter who had been given every advantage and squandered them all. She was the person who had opportunity handed to her on a silver platter and found it boring. Isabella had finished talking with her co-workers and was slowly making her way back toward Victoria's section of the restaurant. She moved with quiet dignity, her head held high despite everything that had happened. Victoria realized that Isabella was returning to work, returning to serve the very people who had just watched her be humiliated. That took a kind of courage Victoria didn't possess. If someone had treated Victoria the way she had treated Isabella, Victoria would have stormed out, called her lawyers, and made sure the entire world knew about the injustice. But Isabella was simply returning to her job because she needed the money to save her mother's life. Victoria felt a strange sensation in her chest, like something hard and cold was beginning to crack. It was painful, this feeling, but also somehow necessary. She realized she was feeling genuine empathy for the first time in her life. And it hurt, because it showed her how empty her existence had been. She thought about her penthouse apartment with its expensive furniture and designer decorations. It was beautiful, but it was also sterile and cold. Isabella probably lived in a small, modest home, but it was filled with love and purpose. Victoria had space but no soul. Isabella had very little space but an enormous soul. The realization hit Victoria like a physical blow. She was 23 years old and had never done anything meaningful with her life. She had never helped anyone, never created anything beautiful, never stood up for anything important. She had simply existed, consuming resources and taking up space. Isabella, meanwhile, was using her life to care for others, to create beauty, to make the world a little bit better, despite her circumstances. She was everything Victoria was not. Kind, talented, selfless, and strong. Victoria looked at her friends, still sitting at their table and checking their phones, probably posting about their lunch on social media. They seemed so shallow now, so concerned with appearances and status. Had she always been like them? Had she really spent years of her life talking about nothing, caring about nothing, contributing nothing? The answer was yes, and it made her feel sick. Isabella was approaching their table now, her expression professional and calm. She was going to continue serving them as if nothing had happened. As if Victoria hadn't just tried to destroy her dignity in front of a room full of people. The grace of it, the forgiveness implied in simply returning to work, was more than Victoria could bear. For the first time in her life, Victoria Ashworth felt the weight of her own conscience, and she didn't know if she could carry it. As Isabella approached the table, Victoria felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Every step the young woman took seemed to echo with the weight of everything Victoria had just learned. The contrast between who she thought Isabella was and who Isabella actually was felt like a chasm that Victoria didn't know how to cross. Isabella stopped beside their table, her notepad ready, her expression professionally neutral. "I'm sorry about the interruption to your lunch," she said quietly. "Is there anything else I can get for you today?" Victoria stared at her, unable to speak. The casual professionalism in Isabella's voice, the way she was simply moving forward as if nothing earth-shattering had just happened, left Victoria speechless. How could she act so normal after what had just occurred? "We're fine," one of Victoria's friends said quickly, clearly wanting to end this awkward situation. "Just the check, please." But Victoria found her voice before Isabella could turn away. "Wait," she said, the word coming out rougher than she intended. Isabella paused, looking at her with those same gentle brown eyes that had shed tears while playing the piano. Victoria started, then stopped. "How do you apologize for being the worst version of yourself? How do you take back cruelty that has already been spoken? I need to ask you something. Your mother's treatment. The $50,000. Is that really what she needs?" Isabella's expression grew cautious. "Yes, Miss Ashworth. But I wasn't trying to ask for anything when I mentioned that. I was just explaining to Mr. Robert why I know," Victoria interrupted softly. "I know you weren't asking. That's what makes this so—" She trailed off, struggling to find words for feelings she had never experienced before. Victoria's friends were looking at her strangely now. They had never seen her speak to service staff like this, with hesitation and what almost sounded like respect. Victoria ignored their stares and focused entirely on Isabella. "How close are you to having enough money?" Victoria asked. Isabella looked uncomfortable with the question. "We have about 8,000 saved so far," she admitted. "At the rate I'm working, it will take me about 3 more years to save the rest. But the doctors say—" She stopped herself, clearly not wanting to burden a customer with her problems. "But the doctors say she might not have 3 years," Victoria finished gently. Isabella nodded, her eyes filling with unshed tears. "The treatment works best when it's started early. Every month we wait, the chances get smaller." Victoria felt something break open inside her chest. She reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook, something she rarely used since most of her purchases were made with credit cards that her father paid. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. "What are you doing?" one of her friends whispered urgently. "Victoria, what's gotten into you?" Victoria ignored her and began writing. $50,000. The amount that could save Isabella's mother's life. The amount that Victoria could spend without even noticing it was gone. She had jewelry worth more than that sitting in her closet at home. "Miss Ashworth, you don't need to—" Isabella began, but Victoria held up a hand to stop her. "I need to do this," Victoria said, and she realized it was true. She had never needed to do anything before in her life, but this felt like a matter of survival, not Isabella's survival, but her own. She tore the check from the book and held it out to Isabella, who stared at it in shock. "For your mother's treatment," Victoria said simply. "All of it." Isabella's hands flew to her mouth. "I can't take this," she whispered. "It's too much. I can't possibly accept this much money from someone I don't even know." "You do know me," Victoria said quietly. "You know exactly who I am. You've seen me at my worst, and somehow you're still standing here being kind to me. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are." Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she still didn't reach for the check. "But why? Why would you do this for someone who's just a waitress?" Victoria felt those words like a knife to her heart. "You're not just anything," she said firmly. "You're a musician who gave up Juilliard to save her mother's life. You're someone who works 3 jobs without complaining. You're someone who can create beauty that makes strangers cry. You're someone who has more grace and dignity in your little finger than I have in my entire body." The restaurant had grown quiet again. Other customers were watching this unusual scene unfold. But Victoria no longer cared what anyone thought. For the first time in her life, she was doing something that mattered more than appearances. "I've been horrible to you," Victoria continued, her voice getting stronger. "Not just today, but every time I've come here. I've treated you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter. I've been cruel and entitled and shallow. I can't take that back, but I can try to do something right." Isabella took the check with trembling hands and looked at the amount. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "This is really real?" she asked in disbelief. "This will really pay for Mom's treatment?" "It's real," Victoria confirmed. "And there are no strings attached. I don't want anything in return. I don't want publicity or recognition or even your forgiveness. I just want your mother to get better." Isabella sat down hard in the nearest chair, staring at the check like she couldn't believe it was real. "I don't understand," she said through her tears. "People like you don't help people like me. Things like this don't happen to people like me." Victoria knelt down beside Isabella's chair, not caring that her expensive dress was touching the restaurant floor. "Maybe it's time for both of us to learn that people like us and people like you are just people," she said softly. "Maybe it's time for me to learn what it means to actually help someone instead of just existing." "But this money," Isabella said, holding up the check. "This could buy you anything you want. A car, jewelry, a vacation. I have all those things," Victoria replied. "I have everything money can buy, and none of it has ever made me feel the way I felt when I heard you play piano. None of it has ever made me feel like I was part of something important." Isabella looked at Victoria with wonder, like she was seeing her for the first time. "You're serious about this? You really want to help my mom?" "I'm serious," Victoria said. "And if you need anything else, any other treatments or medications or anything at all, I want you to call me." She pulled out one of her business cards and wrote her personal cell phone number on the back. "I mean it. Promise me you'll call if you need help." Isabella nodded, clutching the check to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world, which Victoria realized it was. This piece of paper represented hope, life, a future for Isabella's family. "I don't know how to thank you," Isabella whispered. "You already did," Victoria said, standing up. "You showed me what a real person looks like. You showed me what it means to have character and dignity and talent that comes from the heart. You gave me something no amount of money could ever buy." Victoria's friends were staring at her in complete bewilderment. They had never seen this side of her before, had never imagined she was capable of such generosity or self-reflection. "We should go," one of them said quietly. "This is all very touching, but we have shopping appointments this afternoon." Victoria looked at her friends and realized that she didn't want to go shopping. She didn't want to spend the afternoon buying things she didn't need to fill a life that felt empty. She wanted to stay here and learn more about what it meant to care about something real. But Isabella was standing up now, wiping her eyes and smoothing her uniform. "I need to call my mom," she said, her voice full of joy and disbelief. "I need to tell her about the treatment. I need to schedule the appointment with the doctor." Victoria watched Isabella hurry toward the back of the restaurant to make her phone call, and she felt something she had never experienced before, genuine happiness that had nothing to do with herself. She had given Isabella hope, and somehow that had given Victoria something she didn't even know she was missing. For the first time in her life, Victoria felt like she had done something that actually mattered. 3 weeks after that life-changing afternoon at Rosewood Bistro, Victoria found herself standing in front of her bathroom mirror at 5:30 in the morning, preparing for a day that would have been unimaginable to her just a month ago. Instead of silk pajamas and designer face masks, she wore old jeans and a simple t-shirt. Instead of planning spa appointments and shopping trips, she was getting ready to volunteer at a local food kitchen. The change hadn't happened overnight. After giving Isabella the check, Victoria had returned home to her penthouse apartment and found that everything looked different. The expensive furniture seemed cold and unwelcoming. The designer clothes in her massive closet felt like costumes for a play she no longer wanted to be in. Even her favorite restaurants and social spots felt hollow and meaningless. Her friends had been concerned, then confused, then ultimately dismissive when Victoria began canceling their lunch dates and shopping expeditions. "It's just a phase," they assured each other. "She'll get over this weird charity thing and come back to normal soon." But Victoria was beginning to realize that her old normal had been anything but normal. It had been a life without purpose, without growth, without real human connection. The first week after the incident, Victoria had found herself driving past Rosewood Bistro every day, not to eat there, but just to see if Isabella was working. She wanted to know how Isabella's mother was doing, wanted to make sure the treatment was going well, but she was afraid that showing up would seem like she was expecting gratitude or recognition. Finally, she had worked up the courage to call the restaurant and ask to speak with Isabella. The conversation had been brief but warm. Isabella's mother had started the new treatment immediately, and the doctors were optimistic about her response. Isabella had cried on the phone while thanking Victoria again, but she had also asked Victoria a question that had stayed with her for days. "What made you decide to help me? I mean, really, what changed your mind?" Victoria had struggled to answer at the time, but now she understood. Watching Isabella play piano had shown her what it looked like when someone lived with purpose and passion. It had made her realize that she had been sleepwalking through her own life, existing without really living. That realization had led Victoria to start asking herself difficult questions. What did she want to do with her life? What kind of person did she want to be? How could she use her privileges and advantages to make a positive difference in the world? The answers hadn't come easily. Victoria had no real skills, no work experience, no understanding of what life was like for people who had to earn their way in the world. But she was determined to learn, even if it meant starting from the very beginning. She had started small, volunteering at a literacy program for adults who had never learned to read. The first day had been humbling and eye-opening. Victoria had assumed that teaching reading would be simple, but she quickly discovered how much patience and skill it required. Her students, many of them older than her, had life experiences that made her own seem trivial by comparison. There was Maria, a grandmother who was learning to read so she could help her grandson with his homework. There was David, a man who had worked construction his whole life but wanted to read books about history. There was Sarah, a young mother who had dropped out of school to work and was now trying to build a better future for her children. Each of them had stories that challenged Victoria's assumptions about education, opportunity, and the value of hard work. They were grateful for her help, but they also taught her far more than she could ever teach them about resilience, determination, and finding joy in small victories. From the literacy program, Victoria had moved on to volunteering at the food kitchen, where she spent 3 mornings a week helping to prepare and serve meals to people experiencing homelessness. The work was physically demanding and emotionally challenging, but it was also deeply rewarding in ways that Victoria's previous life had never been. She learned to chop vegetables efficiently, to serve food with dignity and respect, to listen to people's stories without judgment. She met veterans who had fallen on hard times, families who were between jobs, elderly people who had outlived their savings. Each person reminded her that the line between security and vulnerability was much thinner than she had ever imagined. The other volunteers at the food kitchen had been skeptical of Victoria at first. They knew she came from money, and some of them assumed she was just doing charity work to make herself feel better or to impress others. But Victoria kept showing up week after week, month after month, doing whatever work needed to be done without complaint. Gradually, they began to accept her as part of the team. They taught her their efficient systems for food preparation, included her in their jokes and conversations, and eventually stopped treating her like an outsider. Victoria had never experienced the satisfaction of being accepted based on her actions rather than her bank account, and it felt better than any luxury she had ever owned. Meanwhile, Victoria had been secretly arranging for Isabella to have opportunities to perform and continue her musical education. She had contacted several music professors at local universities, explaining Isabella's situation and her incredible talent. Within a month, Isabella had been offered a part-time scholarship that allowed her to take classes while continuing to work. Victoria had also quietly arranged for Isabella to perform at several charity events, paying her performance fees that were far above the usual rates. Isabella didn't know that Victoria was behind these opportunities, and Victoria wanted to keep it that way. She was learning the difference between helping someone and controlling someone, between genuine generosity and ego-driven charity. The most surprising change in Victoria's life had been her relationship with her parents. When they learned about her volunteer work and her changed lifestyle, they had been concerned and confused. Her father, Richard Ashworth, had initially assumed that Victoria was going through some kind of crisis or rebellion. "This isn't like you, Victoria," he had said during one of their weekly dinners. "You've never shown interest in this kind of work before. Are you sure you're not just feeling guilty about something?" But as the weeks passed and Victoria's commitment to her volunteer work remained steady, her parents began to see that this change was real and lasting. They started asking her about her experiences, listening to her stories about the people she was helping, and gradually understanding that their daughter was becoming someone they had never expected, but were proud to know. Victoria's mother, who had spent years organizing charity galas and fundraising events, began asking Victoria for advice about how to make their family's philanthropic efforts more meaningful and direct. Together, they started visiting the organizations they supported, meeting the people who benefited from their donations, and finding ways to be more personally involved in the causes they cared about. The changes in Victoria's life weren't always easy. There were days when she missed the simplicity of her old existence, when the problems of the people she was trying to help felt overwhelming, when she questioned whether she was really making any difference at all. But then she would remember Isabella playing piano. Remember the courage it had taken to give up Juilliard for love. Remember the grace with which Isabella had forgiven her cruelty. Those memories reminded Victoria that real change was possible, that people could choose to become better versions of themselves. That privilege could be used as a tool for good rather than just personal comfort. Victoria was still wealthy, still privileged, still learning how to navigate the world outside her protective bubble, but she was no longer the same person who had screamed at a waitress over a few drops of water. She was becoming someone she actually respected, someone who contributed to the world rather than just consuming from it. And for the first time in her life, Victoria was excited to see who she might become tomorrow. 6 months after that transformative afternoon at Rosewood Bistro, Victoria sat in the elegant concert hall of the Metropolitan Arts Center, her heart pounding with anticipation and pride. Tonight was Isabella's debut performance with the City Symphony Orchestra, a moment that had seemed impossible just half a year ago. The concert hall buzzed with excited conversations as audience members found their seats. Victoria had chosen to sit in the regular seating section, rather than the VIP boxes her family usually occupied. She wanted to experience this concert the same way as everyone else, without the barriers that wealth usually created between her and the rest of the world. Beside her sat Isabella's mother, Rosa Martinez, whose recovery had been nothing short of miraculous. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone had dared to hope, and Rosa was now in complete remission. Her face glowed with health and happiness as she clutched the concert program featuring her daughter's photograph. "I still can't believe this is really happening," Rosa whispered to Victoria, tears already forming in her eyes. "6 months ago I thought I might not live to see Isabella graduate from high school, and now look where we are." Victoria squeezed Rosa's hand gently. Over the past months, she and Isabella's mother had developed an unlikely but genuine friendship. Rosa had taught Victoria how to cook traditional Mexican dishes, while Victoria had helped Rosa navigate the complicated world of medical insurance and treatment options. Their friendship had grown from gratitude into something much deeper and more meaningful. The journey to this moment had been remarkable for everyone involved. After receiving Victoria's life-changing gift, Isabella had thrown herself into her music with renewed passion. The part-time scholarship Victoria had secretly arranged had allowed Isabella to study with some of the city's finest music teachers, while still working enough to support her family. Isabella's talent, combined with proper training and the freedom from crushing financial worry, had blossomed in ways that amazed even her instructors. Word of her abilities had spread through the local music community, leading to this invitation to perform as a featured soloist with the symphony orchestra. Victoria had watched Isabella's progress from a respectful distance, attending her smaller performances but always staying in the background. She had learned the importance of supporting someone, without trying to control their journey or take credit for their success. Isabella's achievements were her own, earned through talent, hard work, and determination. The orchestra began to take their seats on stage, and Victoria felt her excitement building. She had attended countless concerts before, but this one felt different. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a celebration of human potential, of dreams that had seemed impossible becoming reality. Isabella appeared on stage, looking radiant in a flowing black gown that Victoria had given her as a performance gift. But it wasn't the dress that made Isabella shine. It was the confidence and joy that radiated from her as she approached the grand piano at center stage. The conductor raised his baton, and the concert hall fell into expectant silence. Isabella's fingers touched the keys, and the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the space with breathtaking beauty. Victoria had heard Isabella play many times now, but tonight was different. Tonight Isabella was playing not as someone fighting to survive, but as someone celebrating life. Every note carried the joy of dreams fulfilled, the gratitude of a daughter whose mother had been saved, the triumph of talent that had refused to be silenced by circumstance. As the music soared and danced through the concert hall, Victoria found herself thinking about how much her own life had changed. The girl who had once measured her worth by the price of her possessions now found meaning in very different places. After that first day of volunteering at the food kitchen, Victoria had gradually expanded her involvement in community service. She now spent 4 days a week working with various charitable organizations, not as a wealthy donor making appearances, but as a regular volunteer who showed up consistently and did whatever work needed to be done. She had started a foundation focused on supporting young artists from low-income families, providing not just financial assistance but also mentorship and opportunities to perform. The foundation was run with the same principles Victoria had learned from Isabella: dignity, respect, and the understanding that everyone deserves a chance to pursue their dreams. Victoria's relationship with her parents had deepened as well. They had been initially concerned about her dramatic lifestyle change, but they had come to respect and admire the person she was becoming. Her father had even begun joining her at some of her volunteer activities, discovering his own capacity for hands-on charitable work. Her old friends had gradually drifted away, unable to understand or relate to Victoria's new priorities, but she had gained new friendships that were based on shared values rather than shared wealth. She had friends now who challenged her thinking, supported her growth, and cared about her character rather than her bank account. The concerto reached its emotional climax, and Isabella's playing became even more passionate and powerful. Victoria watched in amazement as Isabella commanded the attention of the entire orchestra and audience, her talent creating a moment of pure magic that connected every person in the room. Victoria thought about the lesson Isabella had taught her that day at the restaurant, that real worth couldn't be measured in dollars or status symbols. Isabella had shown her what it looked like to live with purpose, to use your gifts in service of something larger than yourself, to find strength in love rather than power. As the final notes of the concerto faded into silence, the concert hall erupted in thunderous applause. The audience leaped to their feet in a standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Isabella stood at the piano, her face radiant with joy and disbelief, accepting the appreciation of hundreds of people who had been moved by her music. Victoria applauded until her hands hurt, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't just Isabella's triumph. It was a testament to what was possible when people supported each other, when privilege was used responsibly, when dreams were allowed to flourish. After the concert, Victoria and Rosa made their way backstage to congratulate Isabella. The young musician was surrounded by well-wishers, music critics, and fellow performers, all eager to praise her incredible performance. But when she saw Victoria and her mother approaching, her face lit up with special warmth. "You came," Isabella exclaimed, embracing them both. "I was so nervous, but knowing you were both out there made me feel like I could do anything." "You were absolutely magnificent," Victoria said, meaning every word. "I've never heard anything so beautiful in my life." Isabella's eyes filled with tears of joy. "None of this would have been possible without you, Victoria. You didn't just save my mother's life. You saved my dreams too." Victoria shook her head gently. "You saved your own dreams, Isabella. You're the one with the talent. The one who worked so hard, the one who never gave up. I just had the privilege of helping a little bit. An older man approached their group, introducing himself as a representative from the prestigious Thornfield Conservatory. Miss Martinez, he said to Isabella, I'd like to discuss offering you a full scholarship to complete your musical education with us. Your performance tonight was extraordinary. Isabella's mouth fell open in shock. The Thornfield Conservatory was even more prestigious than Juilliard, and getting a full scholarship there would open doors she had never even dared to dream about. Victoria felt a surge of pride and happiness that had nothing to do with her own achievements. This was what real joy felt like, celebrating someone else's success, knowing that you had played a small part in making it possible, but understanding that their accomplishment was entirely their own. As the evening wound down and they prepared to leave the concert hall, Isabella pulled Victoria aside for a private moment. I want you to know, Isabella said quietly, that you're not the same person who yelled at me that day in the restaurant. You've become someone completely different, someone wonderful. I'm proud to call you my friend. Victoria smiled, feeling a warmth in her heart that no amount of money could ever have purchased. You taught me something that day that I never knew before, she replied. You taught me that the most beautiful things in life can't be bought or inherited. They have to be earned through character, kindness, and caring about something bigger than yourself. As they walked out of the concert hall together, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a spoiled, entitled young woman who measured her worth by her bank account and treated others as if they were invisible. Tonight, she was someone who had learned the true meaning of wealth, the richness that comes from genuine relationships, meaningful work, and using your advantages to lift others up rather than putting them down. Isabella had shown her that real class had nothing to do with money or status. Real class was about how you treated people when you thought no one important was watching. It was about grace under pressure, kindness in the face of cruelty, and the courage to keep pursuing your dreams even when the odds seemed impossible. Victoria had learned that the most valuable transformation wasn't changing your circio,